back in session. You may be seated.
All right, Mr. Lally, can we have Mr. O'Keefe again, please?
Yes. Witness, please.
All right, whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. So, Mr. O'Keefe, you testifying before the lunch and recess before, you had indicated that defendant Ms. Reed had gone upstairs for some period of time. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and that's at your brother's house on Meadows Ave?
Correct.
And who, if anyone, had she gone upstairs with?
Her father,
About how long were they upstairs for?
10, 15 minutes.
And as far as, was there anyone else in the upstairs area of the home with them at the time that they were upstairs?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Now, as far as Ms. Reed was concerned, what, if any, conversation did you have with her while she was at the house for that period of 30 minutes or so?
None, really.
And as far as any other members of her family, without any reference to what it was, what, if any, sort of substantial conversation, what, if any, conversation did you have with either her father, her brother, or the brother's wife?
Again, none, not really. I didn't really have much interaction with any of them while they were at the house.
Now, you're obviously familiar with your brother's house on Meadows Ave, is that correct?
Yes.
And as far as the house itself, what, if any, sort of security did your brother have installed on that house on Meadows Ave?
He's gonna, excuse me, a ring. He had a Ring doorbell, and then a Ring camera floodlight combination above the garage doors overlooking the driveway.
And when you say the doorbell, how many sort of points of, how many doors or entrances into the house were there?
With cameras, I would say 2. I mean, the driveway and then the main front door of the house.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Show you just 3 photographs, exhibits 2, 3, and 4. If you could just look at those briefly and look up when you finish. And generally speaking, sir, do you recognize what's depicted in those 3 photographs?
Yes. The first,
Well, before we get to them, just in general, do
yes.
you recognize those? Okay. And what do you recognize them in general terms? What do you recognize them to be photographs of?
that's my brother's house at 1 Meadows Ave in Canton.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have exhibit 2 up on the screen. So I'm going to, may I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes.
What I'm going to hand you here is a laser pointer. Basically, just click this button here.
Okay.
And again, sir, what's up on the screen is exhibit number 2. What are we looking at?
That's my brother's house at 1 Meadows Ave in Canton.
And as far as the Ring doorbell camera that you were referring to, is that something that's visible in this photograph?
Not in that photograph, no.
And so typically when you would come over to your brother's house, what would be sort of the general points or door that you would use to go inside the house?
So either the garage door or there's a side door right behind that bush.
So behind that bush, is there any sort of like walkway or anything like that over there?
Yeah, so there's a walkway that leads up to a couple of steps and then to the entryway.
Is that where the Ring doorbell would have been located, labeled as sort of the front door?
Yes.
And the garage area with the driveway that you were referencing in relation to this photograph, it's not depicted in this photograph, is that fair to say?
Correct.
Okay. So which with relation to this photograph, understanding that it's not depicted in it, where would that be?
The driveway would be to the right side of the house as we're viewing it from here.
And if I could turn your attention to the next exhibit, number 3, Ms. Gilman, if I could have that. And what's up on the screen, is that what you have before you as exhibit number 3?
Correct.
And whereabouts in relation to the house, what are we looking at here?
So that would be the driveway, right side of the house, 2 garage doors, the upstairs window, and the ring camera / floodlight combination.
Now, with respect to the garage, was there a particular way that your brother would have kept sort of the garage area?
Yeah, he had on the left side, he had a 1971 Ford LTD parked over that side. And he would typically park his car on the right side.
So the car that you were talking about before, that being the Chevy Traverse, is that correct?
Correct.
And so the floodlight combination with the camera, that you see that in this photograph, is that correct?
Yes,
If you could, just using the laser pointer, direct the jury's attention to that.
right under the window.
And as far as these particular ring cameras, driveway, garage one, and the front door, the sort of side entryway there, who, if anyone, as far as you knew, had access to those particular cameras? How would they be accessed?
Most likely through the Ring app on your cell phone. And I believe the only ones who had access to was my brother and Karen Reed.
And as far as your
Objection,
brother,
move to strike.
All right, I'll strike that, see if you can lay a foundation.
as far as your brother was concerned, what if anything would he do with reference to those Ring cameras and his app on his phone when people would arrive at his house?
I mean, a few times he talked to me through the speaker. You know, if I pulled up to the house and he wasn't home, and he would speak to me on it. But I'm not sure if I follow the entire question.
No, and that's exactly, so there were points where you would come to the house, correct, and he wasn't there?
Yes.
And he would sort of talk to you through the Ring application, is that
Yeah.
fair to say?
Yes.
Now, as far as Ms. Reed was, when you say you believe she had access to it, what leads you to believe?
I believe the kids had mentioned it before. Kaylee and Patrick, mostly Patrick.
All right, I'm going to strike that.
Now, if I could direct your attention to the next exhibit before your exhibit number 4. And again, sir, what's up on the screen, is that what you have before you as exhibit 4?
Correct.
And if you could describe to the jury sort of what part of the house we're looking at here, and what, if anything, in relation to the Ring that you observed here.
That is also the driveway from a different view. Call it the top of the driveway looking down onto the street. Right in this picture here, the Ring camera or the floodlight ring is not visible.
And the walkway that you were talking about that was behind the bush, do you see that in this photograph?
Yes.
Okay, if you could direct the jury's attention to where that is. So if you follow that walkway sort of around to the bush, where does that lead?
Right to the like breezeway door.
If I may approach it.
Yes.
Now, Mr. O'Keefe, the Ring camera that we're talking about, have you seen those on like a disc form? Is that correct?
Have I seen them on a disc form? I'm not sure if I follow that question.
Sure. Have you viewed any Ring camera footage from either the front door or the driveway to your brother's house?
No, I didn't have access.
Now, Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes. All right, so Mr. Lally, you have something to mark as an exhibit?
Yes, Your Honor. So there are 2 discs, one labeled Meadow Ave Ring Videos. Oh, sorry,
So they've already been
already
marked.
been marked. I know.
All
Thank you.
right, so the next, go right ahead.
No. Okay. So
And let us know if you want the lights dimmed at all, Mr. Lally.
yes, please, Your Honor.
Do you want that now?
Yes.
Would please? Thank you.
So, Ms. Gilman, if I could have from what's been marked as Exhibit 6, the driveway camera. If I could have video number 161. And if you could, just pause that just for a moment. Now, Mr. O'Keefe, what's up on the screen there? Do you generally recognize what's depicted there?
It looks like Karen Reed's vehicle, my brother's vehicle, and it looks like another SUV behind it. I don't know who the 2 people.
If you could, just using the laser pointer before you, if you could just direct the jury's attention to which vehicle you're talking about when you. So starting with Miss Reed's vehicle, where is it in this video that you observed?
I believe it's that one right there.
And your brother's vehicle,
Is back there.
and the vehicle you're referring to as your vehicle, where is it? And if you know, when about is this video depicting in relation to what you've described as the events of January 29th?
I mean, that would be in the morning coming back from the hospital, mid-morning.
And as far as the people within this video, do you recognize any of the people within?
That'd be myself. I believe that behind me could be Kerry Roberts, because I believe that's Kerry Roberts' car. She drove my father back from the hospital to One Meadows.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just run the video.
Oh, that's my mother.
Ms. Gilman, from the same exhibit, if I could have video mark 165. Again, Ms. Gilman, if you could just pause that briefly. Now, with respect to this video, do you recognize the vehicle that just pulled into the driveway here?
That looks like Karen Reed in the photo, on the video. I assume that's her father's car.
So this would have been the time that Ms. Reed, the defendant, arrived with her family from the hospital as well?
Correct.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just run that through. Thank you. If I could ask for the next labeled video from Exhibit 6, number 166. Gentlemen, if I could ask you to pause there. Now, Mr. O'Keefe, with the last video, the two individuals sort of walking over to the house, do you recognize who those were?
It appeared to be Karen Reed and her father.
And the individual who just got out of the same vehicle, do you recognize that person?
That appears to be Karen Reed's brother, Nathan.
And again, this particular day, January 29th, at your brother's house, that's the first time that you met him, is that correct?
Correct.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just play this one. Yes. Thank you. Ms. Gilman, from the same exhibit number 6, if I could have video 169. Just there for a moment, please. Now, as far as you mentioned earlier in your testimony that after Ms. Reed arrived at the house, that your nephew Patrick came home as well?
Correct.
And do you see your nephew Patrick in this video up on the screen now?
Yes.
So this would depict when he got dropped off, essentially.
Correct.
Ms. Gilman, if you could just run that, please. Ms. Gilman, from the same exhibit 6, if I could have number 176. Pause that right there. Now, from this video, you referenced early in your testimony, Ms. Reed had gathered some belongings and then had left with all of the vehicles that her family came with, correct?
Correct.
And do you recognize anyone depicted in this video number 176?
That's Karen Reed.
And what, if anything, do you observe in this video her to have in her hand at this time?
Looks like some type of a bag.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just play this one. Now, Ms. Gilman, if I could have from the same Exhibit 6, number 178. I could ask you to just pause it right there. Now, Mr. O'Keefe, you were at your brother's house on Meadows Ave for a majority of that day, correct?
Yes.
Okay. About how long were you there into the evening?
Yes.
And at some point were attempts made in and around your brother's house, the driveway, the walkway, things of that nature, as far as snow removal was concerned?
At one point, other than me shoveling, Patrick's friend's father came with a snowblower.
And so initially it was you shoveling, what if anything was your father doing while you were shoveling as well?
It was just me shoveling.
And do you recognize what's depicted up in this video as far as any individuals in this video?
I believe that is me standing there with the shovel.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just play this through with this. Ms. Gilman, from that same Exhibit 6, could I have video number 185? Ms. Gilman, if you could just pause it right there. Now, in reference to the snowblower coming out, or sort of the friend of Patrick, the father of Patrick's friends, do you recognize anybody in this video here?
I'm assuming that's the father of Patrick's friend, but I'm not sure.
So fair to say this was later in the day after you were out there shoveling and after the defendant had left the house, is that correct?
Yes.
And with regard to that particular day of January 29th, do you recall any law enforcement, whether they be PD or state police, coming to the house while you were there that day?
Not on the 29th, no.
During the course of clearing the driveway out as far as snow or ice, what, if anything, did you observe as far as beyond just sort of snow and ice? Were there any sort of other items within the driveway that you recall seeing, or?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could just play this video. Thank you. And lastly, from this exhibit, Ms. Gilman, if you could, from Exhibit 6, pull up video number 239. Mr. O'Keefe, what's up on the screen right now is that essentially what the driveway looked like at the end of sort of the snow blowing and the shoveling and snow removal that day?
Yes.
And that vehicle towards the top, that's your vehicle, is that correct?
Yes.
And is this around the time that you would have been leaving your brother's house on January 29th?
Yes.
Mr. Courthouse, we can have the lights back up. Thank you, sir. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
What's been marked as exhibit number 1. Recognize that?
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have exhibit 1 up on the screen. And Ms. Gilman, if you could just enlarge that a little. Thank you very much. And what's up on the screen, Mr. O'Keefe? Is that what you have before you as exhibit number 1?
Yes.
And what are we looking at in this exhibit?
That's my brother.
And as far as your earlier testimony in regard to the vehicle that he kept sort of on the left side of the garage, what, if anything, do you recognize?
It's depicted in the picture. It's a convertible 1971 Ford LTD.
And with reference to that vehicle, how did your brother feel about that vehicle?
He enjoyed it. He thought it was fun driving around, in a convertible. Nephew Patrick enjoyed, being driven to baseball games and whatnot in it. So.
And your niece, Kaylee, how did she feel about it?
She did not like it. Still doesn't.
Thank you, sir. May I approach this to retrieve your?
Yes.
I have nothing further.
All right.
Mr. O'Keefe, sir, I have no questions for you.
All right, Mr. O'Keefe, you are all set, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
This way, sir.
1 second, Jody. Your next witness.
I'm sorry. Your Commonwealth will call Mrs. Erin O'Keefe to the stand.
Mr. Officer, the evidence you give the court and during the case down here is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. You may take this.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Sure, it's Erin O'Keefe, Okeeefe,
And where is it that you live, ma'am?
West Bridgewater.
And who, if anyone, do you live there with?
I live with my husband, Paul, and our 2 girls.
And how long have you lived there in West Bridgewater?
Be 10 years this year.
And your girls, how old are your girls?
Now 13 and 10.
And what is your husband's name?
Paul,
And how long have you and Paul been together? How long have you been married?
will be 24 years this year and 17 years married this year.
And do you work, ma'am?
I do.
And what do you do for work?
Currently, I switched jobs. Currently, I work for a mechanical contractor.
And just sort of in general terms, what type of work is it that you do?
I'm their marketing director.
And you said you switched jobs. So how long have you been doing this sort of new job?
I'll be there 2 years in October.
And your husband, Paul, how did the two of you meet?
I was his waitress in a bar when he was in college.
And as far as your husband Paul is concerned, his parents, what are their names?
John and Margaret,
And your husband Paul, did he have any siblings?
2. An older sister and an older brother, John and Kristen.
And of the 3, John, Kristen, and Paul, who's the oldest, who was the youngest, and what is sort of the age difference between the 3?
Kristen was the oldest. Johnny was next, and Paul being the youngest. And Paul's what, 3 years younger than Johnny? 4.
And your sister-in-law, Kristen, she was the oldest, correct?
Hmm.
Was she married at some point?
Yes, her husband Steve.
Do you recall about when it was that your sister-in-law, Kristen, and Steve got married?
They got married in 2006.
And your sister-in-law, Kristen, and her husband, Steve, did they have any children?
They did, Kaylee and Patrick.
And Kaylee and Patrick, about how old are they?
Kaylee is 16 now, and Patrick is 13 now.
Now, excuse me. At some point, did their last name was Furbush, is that correct?
Correct.
And at some point, did your sister-in-law, Kristen, her husband, Stephen, and their children move to the town of Canton?
They did.
And about what time or what year was that?
2009, 2010, I believe.
And if you know, where had they been living previously before they moved to Canton?
They were renting out their townhouse in Abington, so they were living in Dorchester with Johnny.
And if you know, at the time that they were living with Johnny, were both Patrick and Kaylee born yet, or
Just Kaylee.
just Kaylee? So fair to say she was relatively young at that point.
Yes.
Now, at some point, your sister-in-law, Kristen, got sick, correct?
Correct.
And do you recall when about that was that you learned of that?
It was June 2013, beginning of June.
And do you recall what she was sick from or what the diagnosis was?
She was diagnosed with glioblastoma.
And at some point subsequent to that, she passed. Is that correct?
Correct. 6 months later,
Sometime in fall, November 2013.
November 11th, 2013.
Now, at that point in November of 2013, as far as you and the rest of your family was concerned, what was sort of the plan or the expectation as far as what was going to happen with the children, Patrick and Kaylee?
I know that my in-laws were helping while Steve was still here. Steve passed away 2 months later, but my in-laws were helping Steve kind of get acclimated.
And what, if any, role did your brother-in-law, you called him Johnny, is that correct?
Yes.
So what, if any, role did your brother-in-law Johnny have with respect to the kids during this time?
He was very involved because he was very involved when my sister-in-law was sick. I think he was out on, he'd hurt his hand or something when he was working out on the, when he was out on the streets, I guess. And so he was on disability and was helping and going to the hospital all the time and being with Kristen.
And you mentioned he was out on disability and that he was working. What was it that your brother-in-law, Johnny O'Keefe, what did he do for work?
He was a police officer in Boston.
Now, you mentioned that shortly after your sister-in-law Kristen passed away, her husband Stephen also passed away. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so what, if anything, sort of became the plan, or what happened with respect to your niece and nephew following their father's death?
Paul and Johnny went out to lunch one day, and we had kind of assumed because Johnny was out on, the streets doing his job like that Paul and I would take the kids, and Johnny said he was going to do it.
So he sort of volunteered or stepped up to do it, correct?
Correct.
And pursuant to that, where did Johnny go to live? Where did the kids live when he did that?
Johnny moved into their house in Canton, the original house that Steve and Kristen had bought. He moved in with the kids there.
And about how long was it that Johnny lived there with the kids when he sort of assumed that role?
Maybe 4 years, 4 or 5 years. I don't remember the exact year that he bought the new house.
And so they lived there for 4 or 5 years, and then you mentioned that he bought a new house. Where was the new house that he bought?
The new house is the house now on Meadows Ave in Canton.
And so from whenever time Johnny bought that house, he lived there basically with the kids, Kaylee and Patrick, until he passed away as well, correct?
Correct.
And with respect to your niece and nephew, what, if any, sort of legal relationship did Johnny have with respect to the kids, Patrick and Kaylee?
He became their guardian.
And during the time that, from the time that your brother-in-law Johnny sort of took over that guardianship with respect to your niece and nephew, as far as dating was concerned, what, if any, sort of long-term relationships did he have during that period? And before you answer that, if I could just ask you for your definition, as far as what do you deem or term as far as a long-term relationship?
1, 2 years, I guess, as a start. 2 years.
So during that time, after he assumed sort of guardianship of the kids, how many of those relationships, 1 to 2 years or so, did Johnny have during that time?
2.
And what were the names of the people that he had those relationships with?
The first was Amy, and then Karen.
And just to be clear, by Amy, that was, where she lived, what town?
She resides in Westwood.
And she had children of her own, is that correct?
Yes.
And the second that you mentioned was Karen, is that correct?
Correct.
What is Karen's last name?
Reed.
Just for clarity purposes, do you see the person, you knew Karen Reed, correct?
Yes,
So just for clarity purposes, for the record, do you see Karen Reed in the courtroom?
I do.
Could you just identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing she's wearing?
Black or blue blazer.
Your Honor, just ask the record reflect the identification of the defendant by the witness.
Yes.
Now, with regard to Ms. Reed, as far as her relationship with regard to your niece and nephew, what, if any, sort of legal relationship did she have with regard to either your niece or nephew or to your brother-in-law, Johnny O'Keefe?
Legal, none.
Now, as far as over the course of, when was the first time that you recall meeting the defendant, Ms. Reed?
I believe it was in June of 2020 during COVID.
Based on sort of your understanding, when was that in relation to when they began sort of their relationship?
I think it was in February or March of that same year.
So right around the time that the pandemic caused a sort of general shutdown, correct?
I think so, yes.
Now, as far as you were aware, did you know of any sort of pre-existing relationship or any time that they had dated in the past prior to that February, March of 2020?
I learned that after the fact.
So fair to say during any sort of previous time that they may or may not have dated, you hadn't met Ms. Reed, you weren't aware of her at all?
Correct. I had not met her.
And do you recall sort of where you were or what the circumstances were the first time that you met the defendant?
I believe we were all coming to our house. It was either, it may have been a birthday party or Father's Day, but we were out on the patio. I think it was June.
So John O'Keefe, Ms. Reed, as well as the children came over to your house for some kind of holiday or something like
Correct.
that. Now, from that time sort of going forward, how would you describe sort of your relationship with the defendant, Ms. Reed?
I liked her a lot.
And as far as prior to January 29th of 2022, would you consider yourself or characterize your relationship as friends?
I would.
And about how often, sort of from that time of when you first met her in June of 2020 through January, the end of January 2022, how often would you see sort of your niece, your nephew, Mr. O'Keefe, and/or Ms. Reed?
1-2 times a month. It was COVID, so when we could be outside or all get together, or if there was a birthday.
And were there any occasions where you would have occasion to spend time with or hang out with the defendant outside of either your husband or your brother-in-law, Johnny O'Keefe?
Yes, and we talked quite often.
And just in regard to sort of in person, about how many times was that?
Without them, I don't recall.
Now, as far as your understanding of sort of the living arrangement around it, how often, what was your understanding as far as the relationship and sort of where everybody lived or where everybody stayed, or how often, things like that?
I believe that Karen was there most times. I do know that she liked to go home on Mondays just to kind of have a fresh time by herself, and Thursdays she was teaching an online class, so she would be home on Thursdays as well. But for the majority of the time, I believe she was over there.
Now, just to be clear, when you say over there, you mean the house on Meadows?
Correct.
And when you say she was home, where else did she have a home during that time?
In Mansfield.
And had you had occasion to be over her house in Mansfield at any point in the time that you were friends?
I had gone over once, yes.
Now, with respect to their relationship, what, if anything, were you aware of as far as fights, arguments, issues, anything like that?
I think normal relationship, you know, the stuff everyone goes through.
If I could ask you just if you could expound upon that a little as far as when you say normal relationship stuff, what exactly do you mean?
I know that, you know, my in-laws being there often could be stressful. And, you know, two people with kids and life, normal everyday relationship.
Now, during this time frame, you were living in West Bridgewater still, is that correct?
Correct.
And where were you, like what town were you working in at that point?
At that time, I was working in Brighton.
So fair to say, relatively long commute between Brighton and West Bridgewater on a daily basis?
Correct.
And so during that sort of long commute, what, if anything, would you do with reference to the defendant, or who, if anyone, would you typically talk to on those long commutes?
I would text her or call her and say, I'm hey and driving, and or she would call me and we would just shoot the breeze and just talk.
And was that something, how often would you do that?
Quite often.
Now, as far as your relationship with the defendant, Ms. Reed, you considered yourself friends or friendly, is that correct?
Correct.
And is that something that you communicated to her, or she communicated to you in any way?
Yeah. And yeah, we would say how well we got along, and she would say if they ever broke up, she hoped that she and I would stay friends.
Now, Mrs. O'Keefe, if I could turn your attention to January 28th, 2022 into January 29th, 2022. Actually, first, let me bring it back a little bit further. So New Year's Eve going from 2021 into 2022. Do you recall that time frame?
I do.
And do you recall where you were or who you were with around that time of New Year's?
We were in Aruba for my mother's birthday.
And when you say we, who, if anyone, were you in Aruba with?
My mother, father, sister, husband, and our two girls.
And over the course of that, were you also aware of where your brother-in-law, Johnny O'Keefe, and Miss Reed and children, Patrick and Kaylee, were at that time as well?
They were also in Aruba.
And so where they were situated in Aruba, where was that in relation to where you were situated?
We weren't close. You'd need a cab. It was not the other side of the island, but far enough away you'd need to catch a cab. They were more downtown.
And what, if anything, did you know about sort of who they were with or how they had come to be there in Aruba at that time?
They were with a large group of people. I don't know how many, but there was a large group of people that was going down.
And as far as you knew, was there any one person, excuse me, in particular that organized sort of that trip? Or
Yes, Laura Sullivan.
and do you know Laura Sullivan?
I do.
And how do you know Laura Sullivan?
I know Laura through Johnny. He's her son's godfather.
And fair to say, as far as you knew, that Mr. O'Keefe, Johnny O'Keefe, and Laura Sullivan had known each other for some time.
Correct.
Now, at any point when you were in Aruba during around the time of New Year's, did you ever meet up with or connect with Miss Reed and Johnny O'Keefe?
We did not.
Now, at some point in time when you were in Aruba during that same time frame, what, if any, conversation did you have with Miss Reed, the defendant?
I don't believe any with Johnny. Karen texted me on the flight down. The flight attendants were Karen and Erin, and we were trying to arrange and see if there was a time we could get together.
So the flight attendants on their flight down had the same names as both yourself and Miss Reed?
Yeah, she texted me and said that.
And so you had been trying to arrange some time or some day to sort of meet up, is that correct?
I don't know. I don't recall. I had texted her on New Year's Eve to see where they were.
And what, if anything, did she reply? Did she reply in text?
She did. It wasn't until later in the evening that she had caught Johnny kissing Laura's sister in the lobby of the hotel.
And what, if anything, further did she indicate to you in regard to that?
Just that they got into an argument about it.
And so did the two of you, and by the two, I mean it's sort of the two groups of families, did you ever connect or meet up at any point when you were in Aruba?
We did not.
Do you have any further conversation with Ms. Reed in reference to what she had indicated occurred at their resort?
I responded and said, like, kissing, and I don't recall what her response was, but I had missed the next text. She said did I want to meet up? She had freshened up and did I want to meet up? But I had missed it and was either already going to bed or just missed it until the next day.
So she had indicated to you via text that they had got into an argument and then further indicated or asked you if you wanted to meet up, correct?
Correct.
All right, Ms. Tillelli, I'm just going to give a brief instruction at this point. All right, excuse me. So, folks, you just heard testimony about statements that were allegedly made by the defendant. You're really not to use the statements for the truth, but you can consider them solely on the limited purpose of the defendant's state of mind and as they go to the nature of the relationship between the defendant and John O'Keefe. Thank you.
Now, between that time in Aruba and January 28th of 2022, had you had occasion to meet up with Johnny O'Keefe and or the defendant Karen Reed or the kids or anybody from that Canton house?
No, our older daughter tested positive and she and Paul had to stay back in Aruba. So we didn't have, and then by the time they got back, it was back to school and we didn't have a chance.
So your oldest daughter was quarantined along with your husband in Aruba, and they came back sometime after you and your younger daughter?
Correct.
And with respect to that, that sort of weekend of January 28th and January 29th, what, if any, plans did you have initially to meet up with your brother-in-law, Johnny, and the defendant?
Johnny had been communicating to Paul that wanted to get us together on the 29th. And I said, there's a big storm coming. I don't think that's going to happen.
And so you were aware somehow of a big storm coming in on that weekend as far as the 29th was concerned?
Correct.
And what, if anything, do you recall sort of about what you were aware of as far as that storm, like how severe, what kind of storm?
I don't recall specifics, but I knew that it was a big storm that was coming for Saturday with a lot of snow.
And so you didn't think that was a good idea to set up a time to meet up with that?
Correct.
Now, on that date of January 28th, what, if any, conversation did you have with Ms. Reed on that day?
She had texted me while I was waiting for the school bus, asking if there was any chance I was out without Paul.
Was that a typical thing that she would text you as far as the without Paul part?
No.
And you indicated that you were waiting for the school bus, is that right?
Correct.
And at that time in January of 2022, you had two daughters, correct?
Yes, correct.
Were they sort of in the same school as far as on the same bus?
No, they were not. They're separate schools.
So fair to say one was maybe in elementary, one was in middle school?
Correct.
So as far as around that time that you received the text, would that have been the younger daughter or the older daughter that you were waiting for bus?
The younger daughter. It was after 3 o'clock.
And who comes home, or at that time, who came home first, the younger daughter or the older?
Our older daughter.
And when you received that text from the defendant, what, if anything, did you, or how did you respond to that?
I said that I was waiting for the school bus and we had basketball on Friday nights.
And the basketball on Friday nights, was that something that was one of your daughters or both?
Both.
And do you recall, well, let me ask you this, with regard to your daughter's basketball, at least at that time, what, if any, sort of relationship did your husband have to those basketball teams?
He was the coach for both of them.
And was that something that was sort of like a local league, is that correct?
Town league.
Town. And did all of you, and by all I mean yourself, your husband, and the two girls, did you all go to both games that night?
Correct.
And do you recall about what time those games were?
6 or 7.
Now, Ms. Reed reached out to you and texted you, and then you responded as you described. What, if any, further conversation did you have with Ms. Reed on that day?
I asked her if everything was okay, if something was up. And she responded and said, just another day. I wish I didn't talk to an O'Keefe after 2004.
And how did you respond to that? If you
I said, what happened? What's going on? And they had bickered, I guess, about her taking Kaylee to Dunkin' Donuts in the morning before school.
And just to be clear, when you say they, you mean Johnny O'Keefe and Karen Reed?
Correct.
Do you recall sort of how that conversation evolved, or what, if anything, else was said during that time?
I just knew that they had gotten into some type, I don't know if it was an argument or there was something. They bickered about her taking them, and he said that she spoiled them.
Now, as far as your conversation with Ms. Reed in regard to the weekends, what, if anything, did the two of you talk about as far as sort of plans for the weekend?
I said I was anticipating a storm, so was probably going to hang in the neighborhood with everybody.
Now, as far as later on in that afternoon, what, if any, sort of further communication did you receive from Ms. Reed that day?
I think the last text was a picture, something that popped up in her memories of my children and Kaylee and Patrick from the Cape that summer, and said, this just popped up in my memories and made me smile.
Now, did you have occasion to talk with Miss Reed any further on that day, the 28th?
No, that was it.
And so you went to your kids' basketball games, came back to your house, is that correct?
Correct.
And do you recall about what time you went to bed that night?
It was either close to midnight or after, because Paul and I were sitting up watching TV,
Do you recall what you were watching on the TV?
Yellowstone.
Was that sort of a binge watch that you were doing?
Yes.
Now, before you went to bed, did you have occasion to sort of, knowing that the snow was coming, did you have occasion to sort of look out and make any observations about what the weather was like before you went to bed?
I noted that while we were still up watching television that it was snowing already.
And did you have occasion to see whether or not it was sort of sticking to either the pavement or the grass or anything like that?
I looked out on the deck and it was starting to accumulate on the deck, sticking to the deck.
You know about what time that was?
Probably around 10:30 or 11.
And this is at your house in West Bridgewater?
Correct.
Now, you go to bed and at some point you wake up on the 29th. And if you recall, what is it that wakes you up the next morning?
I woke up to my husband on the phone with his mother saying he's going to be okay. He's going to be okay. And they got off the phone and I said, "What happened? What's going on?" And he said they found Johnny in the snow this morning.
And after that phone call, what is it that your husband Paul did?
He's pacing around and he goes to the bathroom to brush his teeth because he said that he was going to drive to the hospital.
Do you know what hospital he was going to drive to?
Good Samaritan.
And based on the weather and sort of the road conditions, what, if any, concerns did you have about that plan of your husband's?
I was concerned with him driving because the roads weren't good.
Now, as far as your in-laws, so your father-in-law is John O'Keefe Jr., is that correct?
Senior.
Senior. And your mother-in-law is Margaret or Peggy O'Keefe? Is that
Correct.
And what, if any, information did you have as far as were they going to the hospital, and if so, how were they there?
They were going to the hospital and Carrie Roberts was going to pick them up because they didn't have a car that could drive in the snow.
Now, was Carrie Roberts someone that you knew prior to this date?
I knew her from when Johnny moved to Canton.
And at some points, do you recall approximately how long was it between the time that the phone call comes in and the time that your husband left your house?
10 minutes.
Relatively quick. I'm sorry, you just have to.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. So then, when your husband is leaving, what, if any, similar to earlier the previous evening, what, if any, observations did you make as sort of the weather and what was going on outside at the time he was leaving?
It was snowing when he was leaving. Heavy.
Now, at some point, you're at home and your children are at home with you, is that correct?
Correct.
And at some point, who, if anyone, do you reach out to sort of find out what's going on?
When Paul was brushing his teeth, I said to him, "Where's Karen? Where is she? Is she okay?" And I called her and I could hear the phone pick up and she didn't say hello. I just said, "Karen, what the hell is going on?" And she just yelled back in the phone, "John's dead." And Carrie Roberts grabbed the phone from her and said, "No, he's not. He's at the hospital. They're working on him." And I didn't know what was going on.
Was there any further conversation on that initial phone call that you made to?
They were in Carrie's car waiting for an ambulance to pick up Karen. And then Carrie was going to pick up my in-laws.
as far as sort of going through that day, what was the next learned as far as your brother-in-law, Johnny, and who did you learn from?
When I spoke to Carrie in the car, I asked her to take my phone number. I knew she was going to the hospital, and I was nervous that Paul was going to be there by himself, so I asked her to please keep me informed as to what was happening when she got there.
And without any reference to anything that Ms. Roberts may or may not have said to you, did you see further updates from Ms. Roberts throughout the course of that morning?
I think I called her every 5 minutes.
And at some point, did you learn what sort of the status was in regards to John?
I think it was, I don't recall the exact time, but Carrie had texted me or called me to let me know when they were finally called in by the doctors from the emergency room.
And what, if anything, did you learn once they've been called in by the doctor?
Objection.
All right, sustained.
At some point later on in that day, did you have further conversation with the defendant, Ms. Reed?
I did.
And you remember approximately what time that was?
I think it was around 1 o'clock.
And if you recall, was that a situation where you called her or she called you, or?
I called her because I didn't know what was going on. And I kept saying to my husband, has anyone checked on Karen? Is Karen okay? So I called her.
And when you called her, what, if any, conversation did you have with her at that time?
She answered the phone and said that I was on speaker and she was in the car with her dad and they were driving to Dighton.
And what, if any, questions did you ask her about what had happened, and what, if anything, did she say?
I asked her, I said, what the hell happened last night? And because I couldn't understand first how they were together, if they had been arguing earlier in the day. And she told me that they were out, that she dropped him at a party afterwards, didn't feel like going, so dropped him and went back to Canton.
What, if anything, did she say occurred after dropping Johnny off?
She said she went back to Canton and I think woke up around 4:30 and couldn't find him, and woke up Kaylee to see if Kaylee had heard from him at all.
What, if anything, did she say happened after that?
She said that she went to go out and look, but the roads were bad, so went back and called Kerry and Jen so that they could drive together.
And by Kerry, you understood that to mean Kerry Roberts?
Kerry Roberts,
And by Jen, who, if anyone, did you understand that to mean?
Jen McCabe.
Is that someone that you knew or were familiar with at that time?
I had never met Jen.
And what, if anything, did she say happened after that when she went out with Kerry and Jen?
I don't, is it possible to refresh my memory on that?
Without getting into that, just as far as beyond sort of what happened, what, if anything else, did the defendant say to you as far as
She told me that she had to remember the bad times, which struck me as an odd comment to say, but I assumed since she was at the hospital that maybe she was medicated, but it just struck me as something odd.
now, in addition to the having to remember the bad times, what, if anything else, did she say to you at that point during that phone call?
She said, I don't think I'm ever going to see you guys again. And I said, of course you will. We're friends.
Now, following that conversation and that day, did you ever speak with the defendant, Karen Reed, again?
No.
May I have one moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Just one last question, ma'am. So in regard to those last two statements that you had testified about, was that all part and parcel of the same conversation when the defendant indicated she was driving back with her father to Dighton?
Correct.
So there was no further conversation after that conversation shortly after 1 p.m.?
No.
I have nothing further for this witness, Your Honor.
All right. Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. We have no questions.
All right, Ms. O'Keefe, you're all set. Thank you. Mr. Lally, your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth will call Officer Stephen Sarif to the stand.
Do you solemnly swear the evidence you give the court and jury in the case down here should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you.
You can sit or stand, whatever you want to do.
Thank you.
Just ask that you speak into the microphone, please. Okay, whenever you're ready, Mr. Lally.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Officer Sarif, Saraf, Canton Police Department.
And how long have you been a member of the Canton Police Department?
About 27 years.
Now, were you working with the Canton Police Department on January 28th into January 29th of 2022?
I was.
Do you recall what shift you were working on that occasion?
I was working midnight to 8 shift.
Midnight to 8 a.m., is that correct?
That is correct.
And were you dispatched to a call at approximately 6:05 a.m.?
Yes, I was.
And if you recall, what was the dispatch in regard to and where specifically were you dispatched to?
It was a call of a person that was unconscious outside, I believe it was 34 Fairview Road in Canton.
Now, that particular area of Canton, are you familiar with that area of Canton?
Yes,
And as far as the town of Canton is concerned with respect to police department, is there sort of different sectors within the town that you would be assigned to patrol?
that's correct.
And the area of Fairview Road, would that be within your sector that you
Yes,
would typically
yes.
patrol?
That was West Sector.
And how many sectors within the town of Canton are there?
4.
Now, that particular area of Fairview Road, what type of area is that? Is it residential, commercial, or something else?
It's residential.
And the roadway of Fairview Road, there's houses on that roadway, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there any sort of, it's a paved roadway, is that correct?
It is, yes.
The lanes, are they divided by any sort of lines in the middle of it?
Yes.
And who, if anyone, owns or maintains that particular roadway?
The town of Canton does.
Now, you received that dispatch. Where were you, if you recall, when you received the dispatch?
I was, there's a church right next to the police station. I was in that parking lot.
And with respect to the evening of the 28th into the morning of the 29th, What, if anything, were you aware of as far as sort of forecast of the weather or anything sort of impending coming?
Yeah, it was snowing pretty good that night. It was a snowstorm that evening.
So there's a snowstorm that had been predicted, is that correct?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. And there was a snowstorm actually occurring around that time, just after 6 a.m.
That's correct.
And at the time that you're responding, a little after 6 a.m., was it light out, dark out, or something?
It was dark out.
And the time, if you know, how much time elapsed sort of between the time that you received the call and the time that you arrived in that area of Fairview?
It's pretty close, so a couple of minutes maybe, because I didn't obviously go as fast as you could go because the roads were pretty snowy.
During the course of, you have been working sort of since midnight, correct?
Correct.
And over the course of your work throughout that evening, had you, or what, if anything, had you noticed with regard to snow removal as far as town plows or anything like that?
I don't understand. Were they plowing? Is that your question? They were plowing the roads.
So there had been some sort of treatment or plowing to the roads prior to your response, as far as you know?
Yes.
What were sort of the road conditions or the visibility or anything like that, if you recall, during your response time?
It was snowing pretty well. The roads were definitely slippery. It took me a while to get to the destination.
And if you recall, sir, what was sort of the path of travel that you took from, you mentioned you were in the church parking lot next to the police station, correct?
That's correct.
And where is the police station located in
So
Canton?
the police station's on Washington Street, 1492 Wash.
And so what was sort of the path of travel that you took from the church lot next to the police station to Fairview?
So I went past the police station onto Chapman Street, and then from Chapman Street, I went to Fairview Road.
And when you were approaching Fairview Road, are you taking a right or left or something?
It's a right.
And as you were taking that right onto Fairview, what, if anything, happened with your vehicle as you were taking that turn?
Nothing that I recall.
And that particular, coming from the Chapman side of Fairview, Fairview goes from Chapman and then it goes down to sort of, let's say, the bottom of the street. It connects with another street. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what is the street that?
Cedar Crest?
Cedar. And if you're coming from the Chapman side down to the Cedar Crest side, what, if anything, is there as far as an elevation? Like, is it uphill, downhill, or flat?
It's down. It's down a hill, fairly decent sized hill.
Now, as you are driving down Fairview, what, if anything, you mentioned it was dark outside, correct?
That's correct.
So what, if anything, beyond sort of the headlights on your cruiser, did you utilize for assistance as you were driving down Fairview?
I had a spotlight on the driver's side, a handheld spotlight to try to locate the house in question.
And if I could just ask you a little bit about the type of vehicle that you were driving. So was it, what kind of police cruiser were you driving on?
It's Explorer.
So SUV, is that right?
Yes, SUV. Yes.
And as far as those, or the particular cruiser that you were driving on that occasion, what, if anything, is it equipped with as far as cameras or anything like that within the vehicle?
Yeah, it's equipped with a camera for front and back, and in the rear seat of the cruiser.
And so as you're driving down Fairview, you reach out and start to utilize your spotlight sort of on, where is that located on the cruiser?
It's on my left-hand side.
And is that a spotlight that's outside of the cruiser or inside of the cruiser? Where is it located
On the outside of the cruiser, but there's a handle that manipulates it so you can point the spotlight where you want to go.
Okay, so you have some sort of tool within the cruiser where you can manipulate where it points?
That's correct.
And as you're coming down Fairview, utilizing that spotlight, what, if anything, do you observe out in front?
Well, as I got to my destination, I saw 3 people on the lawn of in the snow, waving at me.
And initially, when you see these three people in the snow, do you have any idea sort of who they are, or male, female, anything like that?
There were 3 women, and I later learned there was a male subject on the ground.
And so when you initially are sort of approaching or getting to the residence, you indicate you see the 3 women waving at you. Could you see, or what if anything, could you see the body at that point?
I saw that there was somebody on the ground. Yes,
So you could see the 3 women and you could see a person on the ground.
that's correct.
And at some point subsequent to this, did you learn the identity of the person on the ground?
I did.
And who did you learn that
John
person?
O'Keefe.
And prior to this dispatch, did you know John O'Keefe in any way?
No,
Now, the 3 females that you saw sort of around Mr. O'Keefe's body on the ground, at some point later, did you subsequently identify who those 3 people were?
I did.
And who did you identify?
One was Karen Reed. The other one was Miss McCabe and Miss Roberts, I believe.
All right, sir, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up, okay, or speak into the microphone.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Now, you arrive on scene and I'm assuming you get out of your cruiser, is that correct?
That's correct.
What, if anything, did you do from there?
I walked over to the scene. I first asked, is this person a drug user? He's have an issue with drugs. Somebody said no, he's a Boston police officer. I said okay. I checked for a pulse. I couldn't find a pulse. Then I went back to my cruiser and tried to find the AED, which is an automated external defibrillator.
Back just for a second there. So you indicated that you checked for a pulse, correct?
That's correct.
And where on Mr. O'Keefe did you check for?
On his neck, it's carotid.
Sort of his carotid, is that correct?
That's correct.
And when you made contact with sort of the skin area in his carotid area on his neck, what, if anything, did you observe as far as Mr. O'Keefe when you did?
I couldn't find any pulse or anything like that, and he was cold to the touch.
Now, when you did this, Mr. O'Keefe, you mentioned, was sort of on the ground, correct?
That's correct.
And how is he sort of positioned on the ground?
He was lying on his back.
And as far as your observations of Mr. O'Keefe during this initial time when you're checking the pulse, what, if anything, did you observe sort of on him or around him or anything like that?
I didn't really.
Let me ask it a different way. So as far as you mentioned that when you arrived there, it was snowing out, correct?
Correct.
And so how much snow was in and around or on top of Mr. O'Keefe when you first observed?
It was about, I would say about 6 inches on the ground. There was a light dusting on top of him, I would say.
And what, if any, observations did you make of Mr. O'Keefe and sort of how he was dressed at this time initially that you observed?
I don't recall what he was wearing.
Now, with reference to the residence at 34 Fairview Road, if you're standing in front of the house on the street facing the house, with O'Keefe lying on his back.
As you're facing the house, it's to the, I'm sorry, go again. Can you say that again, please?
So if you're standing on the street facing the house, was Mr. O'Keefe more to the center of the property, the right of the property, or the left?
He was on the left of the property, yes.
Now, in addition to Mr. O'Keefe, in this sort of area on the left side of the property, what, if any, sort of other landmarks or other things that you observe on that side of the property?
To the left of the property, there was a fire hydrant, a bush, and a flagpole, I believe. To the left, to the farther left, like more near the property line, I would say.
Now, with reference to, you mentioned that it was snowing out and there was snow on the ground, correct?
That's correct.
What, if anything else, did you note as far as the weather conditions, as far as wind, temperature, or anything like that?
It was, I would say it was near blizzard conditions. It was snowing really, really hard.
And how cold? Obviously, January, it's snowing out. It was cold, but how cold was it, if you know, when you first arrived?
Less than 32 degrees. I don't know exactly. I mean, it was cold.
So you pull up in that area with the three females. Are they to your right or to your left?
I pulled up, basically, I had my cruiser straight on.
And
My,
so which side of the cruiser were the three females and Mr. O'Keefe when you pull up and stop?
was straight ahead,
Straight ahead. Okay.
well,
And
a little to the left.
And what, if any, other vehicles did you observe sort of in the roadway in that area where three females were and Mr. O'Keefe?
There was another vehicle in the roadway on the side of the road. I parked basically right behind that.
And do you recall anything about that vehicle, like what type it was, what
I
color,
don't.
or anything like that?
I don't recall.
Now, with regard to the three females you identified as Ms. Reed, Ms. McCabe, and Ms. Roberts, do you recall where they were in relation to Mr. O'Keefe, each of them, when you first sort of pull up and get out of your cruiser?
So when I arrived, I saw Miss Reed looked like she was giving CPR to him, and she had blood on her face.
Now, in addition to yourself, there are other sort of first responders that are dispatched to this scene as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And of them, who, if anyone else, was on scene at the time that you arrived?
When I arrived, I was the first to arrive. Then there was Officer Mullaney that came a few minutes later, and then the fire department came after him, and I believe Sergeant Good came at, like, within that. I don't know how many minutes, but it was pretty close.
So you're first to arrive on scene, and then Mullaney comes a couple of minutes later.
Yes.
And about how long was it between when Officer Mullaney arrives and when the fire department arrives?
Couple minutes. I don't.
And at some point after that, a Sergeant Good comes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Sergeant Good is a sergeant with your department.
That is correct.
Now, the fire department, when they arrived, do you recall what type of apparatus they had that arrived on scene?
I believe it was an engine. They usually come with an engine and an ambulance.
So to your recollection, it was at least an ambulance and an engine.
Yeah. Yes.
When you were in transit, sort of coming from the church parking lot next to the station, 234 Fairview, what, if anything, did you have activated on your cruiser as far as lights or sirens or anything like that?
I believe I might have my blue lights on. I'm not sure.
As far as the time that you're coming, this is shortly after 6 a.m. in a blizzard, was there, what, if any, sort of other vehicular traffic did you observe en route from church parking lot to 34 Fairview?
There wasn't any that I can recall.
So you go to get your AED device from your cruiser, is that correct?
That's correct.
And around that time that you're retrieving that, what happens?
The FD, the fire department, came on scene, and they took over care of Mr. O'Keefe.
Now, beyond sort of just checking pulse, as far as around that time when you were checking the pulse in the carotid area for Mr. O'Keefe, what, if any, other observations did you make with regard to any injuries or anything else on Mr. O'Keefe?
Well, when I first got there, he had blood on his face, and it was just wiped away. So that's the only.
So there was blood on his face that was wiped away?
That's correct.
Now, when the fire department arrives on scene and they sort of take over resuscitative efforts with regard to Mr. O'Keefe, is that correct?
That is correct.
And the person you identified as Ms. Reed, firstly, do you see that person in the courtroom today?
I do.
Could you just identify as to where she's seated or an article of
See,
clothing?
we got the table right there, black.
Trying to just ask record reflect identification done by the witness.
Yes.
Now, after the fire department arrived and they sort of take over resuscitative efforts with regard to Mr. O'Keefe, what, if any, observations did you make of Ms. Reed and what she was doing or saying at that time?
Miss Reed was visibly upset. She kept saying, this is all my fault. This is my fault. I did this. And she was very hysterical.
And
She kept asking, he's dead. Is he dead? Is he dead?
And with that specific phraseology, that's something that she kept saying?
Yes,
And by your repetitive nature, I'm assuming it was said something that she said more than once, correct?
several times, correct.
And when she's saying this, can you describe sort of how she's saying this? I mean, is it a whisper? Is it a scream? Or is it something in between?
She was yelling pretty good.
And with regard to her repetitive question, as far as is he dead, what, if any, response did you provide to her in regard to that?
I just said they're doing the best that they can. I don't know.
Now, at some point, did you direct Ms. Reed, the defendant, to somewhere else away from Mr. O'Keefe?
Yeah, I tried to get her out of the elements. I put her in a car. I don't know if it was my cruiser or another cruiser there, but I had her sit in the back seat just to get out of the snow.
And did she stay in that cruiser for any?
She stayed in for a few minutes and then she was like up and down, up and down.
So sort of in and out of whatever car you put her into.
That's correct.
When she would come out of the car, where would she go?
She was just walking around. From what I remember,
Now, with reference to Mr. O'Keefe, he's laying on his back on the ground. That location, where was that in relation to the roadway of Fairview Road?
I would say about 20 feet off the road.
So if it's 20 feet off of the road, is it fair to say that was on sort of the front lawn of 34 Fairview?
Yes, that's correct.
And at some point, the fire department takes Mr. O'Keefe's body off of the lawn. Is that correct?
That is
And where were
correct.
you in relation to Mr. O'Keefe when that happened?
I don't remember.
And if you don't remember, do you recall anything about sort of what the ground looked like when Mr. O'Keefe was lifted up?
I don't recall. I didn't.
Now, that area around where Mr. O'Keefe was, when you initially come up, you see him on the ground and you check for a pulse. If anything, did you note around Mr. O'Keefe's body as far as the condition of or disturbance of the snow around?
I noticed that there were footprints and track marks around the body itself. There was none coming from the residence or the area. It was just right around the body itself.
And so the position that Mr. O'Keefe is lying on his back on the lawn, correct?
Correct.
Is his head closer to the house or the street or something else?
I believe his head was closest to the house.
And the footprints that you're talking about, was that between sort of his feet in the street or above his head, or where was it in relation to
Basically all around him because people were walking around him.
And as far as beyond sort of the immediate area above his head, between his head and the house, what, if any, footprints or what, if any, disturbance in the snow did you observe up there?
I didn't see any.
Now, Officer Saraf, about how long was it that you were on scene?
I want to say about an hour and a half.
And at some point, the fire department transports Mr. O'Keefe from the scene, is that correct?
That is correct.
And do you know to what facility he was transported to?
I don't recall where they went.
And after Mr. O'Keefe was taken away by the fire department, as far as the three females, Ms. Reed, Ms. McCabe, and Ms. Roberts, do you know where they went or what they did following that?
They, after talking to Sergeant Good, they left in their car. I don't know where they went. The car that was there, they left.
Now, at any point in the time that you were on scene before they left, did you have any conversation with any of the three of them?
I asked, where were they, what happened? And what were they doing?
And who specifically
I-
did you talk to, if you recall?
Well, I asked Miss Reed, and she couldn't really tell me too much about what happened. Miss McCabe said that they were drinking in a couple bars downtown.
Let me just stop you
Okay.
before, as far as, so just sticking with Miss Reed.
Yep.
You asked her what happened and you indicated she didn't really tell you much. What,
No,
why not? What was her condition like at that point?
she was very upset.
So the same upset that you were describing earlier, did that sort of continue throughout the time that she was on scene while you were there?
I would say yes.
And at some point, did you speak to Miss McCabe without reference to what she told you?
I'm sorry.
At some point while you're on scene, did you speak to either Miss McCabe or Miss Roberts without reference to what they told you?
No. I mean,
Let me rephrase.
rephrase it, yeah.
At some point when you're on scene, did you have occasion to have a conversation with Miss McCabe?
Yes.
And at some point when you were on scene, did you have occasion to have a conversation with Miss Roberts?
I didn't speak with Miss Roberts, I don't believe.
Was there someone else from your department that was speaking with Miss Roberts on scene? You know.
I believe Sergeant Good or Officer Mulaney was.
So one of the other two officers that were there.
Correct.
Now, following Sergeant Good's arrival, who, if anyone else from your department, arrived on scene at some point?
Detective Lank, Detective Sergeant Lank, and Lieutenant Gallagher.
And if you know, when was their arrival in relation to sort of when you arrived?
It was light out, so I want to say maybe 7 o'clock-ish.
And so for the period that you were on scene, you said it was about an hour and a half. Is that correct?
That's about right.
The weather conditions that you described sort of when you first arrived, what, if any, change occurred in the weather conditions from the time that you arrived and the time that you left?
The conditions lightened up a little bit. I mean, it was still snowing, but
Still snowing, still cold, correct?
yes, correct.
The wind, was that still persistent as well?
I would say yes.
Now, at some point after Miss Reed, the defendant, left the scene, did she come back?
She did.
And do you know how long a period it was that she was gone between when she left and when she came back?
Just a few minutes.
And do you know why she came back?
I don't know.
And when she returned to the scene, who, if anyone, did you speak with her further at that point?
No,
Who, if anyone, did you observe her to be speaking with?
I don't recall.
Now, the initial ambulance that showed up took and transported Mr. O'Keefe, is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, after that ambulance left and Ms. Reed came back to the scene, what, if any, other apparatus from the fire department arrived on scene at that point?
Another ambulance came.
And who, if anyone, went in that ambulance for transport?
They took Miss Reed to the hospital.
And do you know what hospital that she went to?
I don't recall.
May I have one moment, Ron?
Yes.
And Your Honor, if I may request the lights be dim.
Okay, could we dim them, please?
Ms. Gilman, if I could have exhibit number 8 up on the screen. Now, Officer Sarif, do you recognize what's depicted up on the screen as exhibit number 8?
Yes,
And what do you recognize as?
it's the house, 34 Fairview.
And that's the house that you responded to on that date, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
And what's contained in that photograph, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what you observed roughly when you arrived on that date?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Direct your attention to this. This is just a laser point.
Yep.
I'm trying not to point it in anybody's eyes. But, basically, this button here, if you just click on that,
Mhm.
that will shine wherever you want it to. So from this photograph in exhibit number 8, sir, where Mr. O'Keefe's body was when you first arrived, is that visible in this photograph or no?
I would say it would be over more to the left.
Okay, so further off to the left, is that correct?
That's correct.
Before we get to that, just briefly, Ms. Gilman, if I could have exhibit number 13. If you could, please enlarge, thank you. Now, Officer Sheriff, do you recognize what's contained in this exhibit number 13?
It's a street.
That's, fair enough. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Let's see.
So what I placed before you as exhibit 13, is that what's up on the screen?
Yes, this is
And is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what Fairview Road looked like around the time that you were dispatched and arrived on scene?
yes,
Absent the lighting condition, you mentioned it was dark when you arrived, correct?
that is correct.
So this is sometime after when the sun has come up.
Correct.
If I could ask you to flip to the next exhibit number 14, if I could have that one. Mr. Tillman. And again, officer, what's up on the screen, is that what you have before you as exhibit 14?
Yes,
And you were testifying earlier about sort of footprints in and around where Mr. O'Keefe was, is that correct?
that is correct.
And what's depicted on the screen in exhibit number 14, is that fair and accurate portrayal of the footprints that you were talking?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Ron?
Yes.
So now I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit 18. Thank you, Ms. Cameron. If you could enlarge that just a little bit. Thank you so much. Now, from this photograph, first and foremost, do you recognize what's depicted up in exhibit 18 on the screen here?
Yes,
And this is 34 Fairview Road, correct?
that is correct.
And in regard to, you had mentioned some sort of landmarks off to the left side of the property, you're facing the property from the street, correct?
Yes,
And if you could, using that laser pointer that I placed up there before you, if you could direct the jury's attention to first those landmarks that you observed. I'm sorry, officer, if you could, while you're.
Oh,
directing,
sorry.
if you could just describe what you're.
so there's the flagpole right there. There's a bush there, and right there, I believe, is the fire hydrant.
And so where in relation to this photograph, if you can see it here, was Mr. O'Keefe's body when you first arrived?
It's right in this area right here.
Now, if I could turn back just a moment, when you indicated that you were coming up to the scene and you could see the three females sort of waving and Mr. O'Keefe on the ground, correct?
That is correct.
About how far away were you from them when you first observed them or first saw them?
About 20 feet or so.
And when you are driving down Fairview, if you could describe to the jury, where is your direction? Sort of, where are you directed as far as you're driving a vehicle? Are you looking straight in front of you, or are you looking out the window? A combination of both, or
I was looking for the house numbers, trying to find the house where it was, and there was, I saw the motor vehicle parked on the side of the road.
And that sort of leads to my next question, sir. So what did you see first? Did you see the vehicle parked in front of you, or did you see the people off to the side of it?
I saw the vehicle.
May I approach this to retrieve your honor?
Yes.
Do you want this?
So, Officer Saraf, you had testified earlier in regard to a camera within your cruiser, correct?
That's correct.
And subsequent to that day, have you seen the video of your arrival to the scene from the cruiser camera perspective?
I saw it once.
Okay. And Your Honor, I would seek to introduce and admit as the next exhibit the cruiser camera stream 1 from cruiser 683.
Or is there an objection?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I can get you across. I'm sorry for the back and forth, Mr. Officer, but if I could ask the lights again. Ms. Gilman, if you could play what's now been marked as Exhibit 25. And if you could just pause it right there, Ms. Gilman. So, Officer Saraf, what's up on the screen? Is that what you recall as far as the sort of visibility and the roadway conditions when you first left the church parking lot?
Yes,
And this is you sort of leaving from the church parking lot as you're going to 34th, correct?
yes,
Now, there are a number of different sort of things up on this screen. There's an indication as far as the speed that the vehicle is going at, correct?
yes.
Okay. And where is that located, if you could, with the laser pointer there?
Sorry. Whoops, sorry.
Now, along sort of the bottom of that particular video, there's an indication as far as mic, brakes, lights, sign, correct?
Correct.
If those are activated, is there any sort of change in sort of the depiction there? Does it change sort of color or anything like that that you're aware of?
I don't know.
And the 683 on the bottom right corner, is that the cruiser that you were in that day?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, as far as sort of the top middle of this video, there's a date and a time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
As far as you're aware, that date and time that's up there, that's accurate to when this occurred, correct?
Yes,
Okay, so we're sort of looking in real time, correct?
correct.
So Ms. Gilman, if you could just let it run from this. Ms. Gilman, I'm sorry, if you could stop with this briefly. So Officer Saraf, this road you're traversing at this point, this is Washington Street, is that correct?
That is correct.
And at some point, you're going to then travel through and then take a right onto Fairview, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, if you could, just for the jury's sake, as you approach Fairview and as you're taking that right turn, just direct their attention to the fact that that's when you're turning onto Fairview.
Sure.
Ms. Gilman, you can go ahead.
So this right here is Chapman Street. This right here is Fairview.
Gentlemen, if you could just pause it there for 1 second. So officer, similar to as the turn onto Fairview, at some point, if you observe the point at which you believe you sort of illuminated your spotlight on the side of the cruiser, if you could just speak up and draw the jury's attention to that as well.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if you could continue.
Right about now, I believe I put the spotlight on.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, Ms. Gilman, if you could just sort of run it from this point to about the 4-minute mark. And then I'd ask you to.
Right there.
Right there. Now, Officer Saraf, this is, you were testifying earlier as far as the vehicle in front of you that you observed first, and then sort of the parties off to your left as far as the 3 females waving and Mr. O'Keefe on the ground, correct?
That is correct.
And if you could just, using that laser, direct the jury's attention to number 1, where the vehicle is that you observed in front of you, and then number 2, where you observed the 3 females and Mr. O'Keefe on the ground.
So here's the vehicle right there, and the females are right there.
Thank you, sir. Now, Ms. Gilman, if you wouldn't mind just running this straight through until about 7.5 minutes. Just one moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
I'm sorry. Perhaps you can sit. I have no further questions to this witness, Your Honor.
All right. Will there be a cross-exam? Because this may be a good time to stop if there is.
There will be a cross-examination.
Okay, so jurors, we're going to stop for the day. I have to caution you, those same 3 cautions. Please do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it and let us know. And just to remind you, tomorrow will be a half day. We'll go from 9 o'clock until 1 o'clock with a mid-morning break. So thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow.
All rise, please. Jurors, close your notebooks and leave them on your chairs. First row, follow me, please.
All right, could I see counsel at sidebar for a moment, please?